we're going to import the character. I'm going to finish off the basic rig here. I'm going to pull in the rigged model. So there it is there. This rest pose will not work for the character right now. If I look at the customize button, it's applying the action to Mulcore model. I need to point it to the right place. So that works. And the last little bits that I need to control are what is known as rotation order. Now, rotation order is best described when we're looking at an additive rotation. So if you grab a bone in XSI and you press rotate, you're looking at the local transforms. And the local transforms can be a little deceiving. You notice here as I'm rotating the character on the y-axis, I'm actually rotating it on all three. Local rotations are just a simple approximation of what's really happening. Local rotations are prone to gimbal lock, that is, some of the axes locking over top of one another and preventing access to the third axis that you would lose. If I work in additive mode, you can see this displayed. In my case, this bone is set up to gimbal on Y. As soon as I rotate on Y to 90 degrees, you can see the X and the Z fold right over top of one another. So Y is the axis that's forcing the gimbal. Really, the X is the axis that's gimbaling, but Y is causing it. So you can actually change that quite easily, and we can experiment with which one will work best for us. If we access the kinematics of our bone, we'll see that the order of rotation is set to an XYZ. So the X is evaluated first. So it becomes my gimbal axis, and the Y is what's dragging it along. So here if I use XZY, I drag Z, and X is evaluated first. So again, X gets evaluated by the second bone's rotation. So it's like a reverse order. So really, again, if I just show you another one here, if we have a Y, X, Z, then by clicking on the X-axis, I'm going to be pulling the Z or the Y in this case, towards a gimbal position. So with a ZXY, if I rotate in X, Z gets pulled towards a gimbal position. So what we want to try doing is prolonging the amount of rotations it takes for us to approach a gimbal position. And the way I'll do this is obviously just by trial and error. It will help. But I find that I least use the X-axis when I'm rotating the shoulder. I mean, if I rotate it, you can see that it doesn't really rotate a lot, whereas the primary axis tends to be down and back and forth. So already you'll notice by rotating down, I'm pulling both the Z and X axes with me. When Y is at the end of the stack, in this case, it pulls them down. That same holds true if I switch to, say, a Y, X, Z. Z will pull both axes with them, and X will pull the Y. So I tend to favor a ZXY position in the arms, and the reason is because I like to rotate the arms down by their sides and still have the Z-axis define the dominant rotation angle of my character, which is a back and forth. And in both cases, you'll notice that I'm only writing to the Z and Y axes. Nowhere am I actually writing to the X-axis. If I choose to write to X, I isolate it there. I would reach gimbal if my X went above 90 degrees, but it would never do that because my character's arm looks horribly twisted at that point. So ZXY is definitely my favorite for the character's bicep. If we look at the forearm doesn't really have the same problem the bicep does. It's really a hinge joint. You may get a little bit of motion here if you need to achieve some positions, and you may need to do a little bit of counter rotation on the X-axis. So really, when you look at it, it's set up pretty well to begin with. The arm will never bend back against itself, and it'll never bend more than 90 degrees in either direction here. So the elbow is almost foolproof at X, Y, Z. The twist is also pretty good, although ideally, if we could have the twist x-axis on the end of the stack, and the problem with that is it sort of throws our rotation off. So you can see that the true axes are actually built, and as soon as I go to X on the end of the stack, it gets a little bit off. So it looks like I'm stuck with either an XYZ, which doesn't pull anything along for the ride, or an XZY. I'll go with the default. Palm, again, not so much an issue because the main dominant axis is Z, and the rest of the bones here holds true as well. The thumb is not going to ever approach a gimbal position. It's really just the shoulder areas that you need to worry about. So in the shoulders here, you can look at the back and forth motion, Y again being dominant here, being the pulling axis, and X being the axis that just gets pulled and left behind, or pulled along with the Y. If I switch to, let's see, perhaps an XZY, I could get the benefit of the shoulder raise. Again, it's never going to raise above 38, 40 degrees and go down below maybe -5 or -10. And I always have a nice horizontal Y plane to fix the shoulder in. So that actually works pretty well for me, the XZY. So I'll do the same thing over here. XZY. And this one's just a small corrective joint. So again, if we use the XZY, you can get a neat kind of shoulder roll. Alright, that actually works pretty well for me. The other objects aren't really, it's not going to really matter that much. With this hip here, well, I won't say that for now, but we get our tilt back and forth. Our hips are never going to reach a position where they will really gimbal unless my character turns around 180 degrees, and at that point I really can't help that. So if I turn, I still won't gimbal there. I'll actually gimbal on this axis. So actually, yeah, an XZY would work for my hips, an XZY for my pelvis root, and I think just a default XYZ would work there. The least used axis is actually my Y axis. So we get a tilt, we still get the hips pivoting regardless of which direction our pelvis is at. Let's try the other one, YZX, and we already reach a gimbal position. So that's definitely not a good one. Alright, I can live with that. And as for our foot roll objects, if we have a look at them, they don't gimbal at all. They're going to be just fine. And my feet, again, the least used axis in the feet would likely be the Y, the Z axis. So if I did that, actually tends to work better, and I can pull this along for the ride. Perhaps if I try the other one, ZYX, I don't get the same rotation. So definitely a ZXY. Y pulls X, X pulls Z. Alright, so that takes care of rotation order, and this allows us to move on to newer things. So a little bit dry, but kind of important. last but not least, we need to zero out our transforms. And if we look at our bones, we can see that we definitely have non-zero rotations. I like to start with 0, 0, 0 rotations for everything, so right away I'm just going to locally make that so, and I'll set a neutral rotation. What this does is just takes all the objects and just zeroes out their rotation values. And let me explain a little bit more. If you press Control K and you jump into the kinematics property page for all 86 bones, one of the attributes is called the neutral pose property, if you will. And right now it's actually holding the original values of the object. So let me see if I can grab an object here that would do this. So this arm will definitely. If I press Control K, you can see that this arm's original rotation is 180, 180, and 194 degrees. If I look at its rotation now in a local mode, its rotation is actually 0, 0, 0. And I did that by taking the values that originate in the neutral pose and swapping them out for the values that the local transform originally has. Basically, the neutral pose subtracts the object's own rotation from itself to give you the illusion that you're working with an offset of 0, 0, 0. So it's just a little mathematical visual for you to work with numbers a little bit simpler. You can actually reset the neutral pose, basically not subtract from the object's own local transform. And when you look at the SRT of the object, the actual scale translate the rotation value is 14 degrees. So instead, if I go in and actually use the neutral pose, you can see that it zeroes it out in this case. So most of these objects, if I just put it to recycle, will have a non-zero value for their Z. Remember, whenever we build skeletons, we want everything else to be zeroed out as much as possible. But definitely all of our controls now, and I can verify this, all have a 0, 0, 0 rotational value. So now this character is ready to hand off to the animators.